the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's be at it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
That's a lot of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 273, How to Not Help Men Recover from Female-Perpetrated Abuse. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and that adorable Spectre of Death, Prim Reaper. Tonight we're going to read the next prevailing feminist narrative on the most important thing about male abuse victims' recovery process. But before we get into that, we gotta do what we gotta do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. Before we go over the article, I just want to show you the author's about page, because there is something that you need to understand about this author. This isn't just some rando's extreme but like inconsequential opinion. This is some mainstream bullshit. The guy's name is Aria or Araya. I think it's Aria. No, it's probably Araya because he's a guy. But and Aria is usually a girl's name. But Baker, and his degree is unfamiliar, MPhil Ed. So this is probably a master's in philosophy education or something like that. But when you get down past like the first paragraph where he talks about being nationally recognized, Baker's advocacy and public scholarship have been featured in New York Times, The Washington Post, Teen Vogue, Huffington Post, Education Post, Vice, BuzzFeed. I don't know why anybody would brag about BuzzFeed, but the Tennessean, Essence Magazine, Native Son Now, and The Mighty. So you have these like a bunch of mainstream press. And then
I think the fact that they're including things like BuzzFeed in there just means they're reaching for whatever they can find.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, you got to remember the publication that started the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory was BuzzFeed, and people took it seriously. So there are people that take BuzzFeed seriously.
Well, I guess so. It just seems kind of like having on your resume, yeah, I got a Michelin star and I also worked at McDonald's.
I know. Like, well, you started, maybe saying you started out at McDonald's and then worked your way up to it, but that, geez, Yeah. But the Washington Post and, like that is very mainstream. The New York Times, Teen Vogue is feminist propaganda for teen girls.
I can't believe that's even still in publication.
Oh, yeah, they all are. 17 magazine, I think Sassy magazine is still in publication. Like, all those, that I used to walk past to get the puzzle books where you do the cryptograms and the crosswords.
Yes.
Those are cool. They still sell those, too. Those little penny press where you have, like, 50 different types of puzzles in the book. But yeah, then there's his list of professional work. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or Lifeline. The Trevor Project, another propaganda thing. Los Angeles LGBT Center. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Center for Autism Research. That's going to be great for autistic people, considering. The School District of Philadelphia's Office of Prevention and Intervention. What they're preventing and intervening in is not listed here. So it could be anything. The Racial Empowerment Collective. Yep. The EASL, that is Ecological Approaches to Social Emotional Learning. So I know Brian's gone over the social emotional learning buzzword and how it's used today. It used to be social emotional learning was this, right? Little brother bites big sister. This happened in my household. My little brother bit me when I was a kid. He was very young. We were fighting over some toy, and he bit me. And my mom was like, "Don't bite Hannah. That hurts." And he just looked at her like she was nuts. No, it didn't. Well, it didn't hurt him. So he was young enough to not understand that I was a separate person from him. And if, I could feel something that he didn't feel. So my mom very gently closed her teeth on his arm and pressed a little bit. And he just was shocked. "Ow, Mommy, that hurts." And she's like, "Well, it didn't hurt me." And he immediately started figuring out, wait a minute. If I do things to people, they might feel something I didn't. He put two and two together right away. And the social emotional learning was he developed a sense of other people's individuality and an emotional reaction to, he immediately understood that he had caused pain, and he felt guilt, and he had remorse and never did it again, told me he was sorry, and then I got a hug, and like biting is something every kid goes through at some point. And they all have to learn that. Like, that's what social emotional learning, when I was in college and I took early childhood development, that's the kind of thing that was described in it. Like, understanding the people around you, having an emotional connection to your personal agency in regard to your interactions with those people. Now, it's all about being, your boundaries are not important, but other people's are. You're the bad guy in every, interaction and so on. If you are a boy, if you are white, if you are able-bodied. So it's all progressive stack related now. And it's no longer an understanding of how children develop and what maturity looks like, and functional maturity in particular. Now it's about controlling people. They've completely destroyed the concept. So he's part of that. That lab.
So basically, social emotions are something that, as we ordinarily understand, children don't fully appreciate until they have a theory of mind around the age of five or six. But
right.
in modern, dare I say, woke parlance, it's generally considered not something we need to teach to children, but something we need to teach white male cisgendered children. If you can wrap your brain around that series of adjectives.
Yes,
basically,
and not like it's also social emotional when your best friend has been studying really hard for a test and they've been getting C's and D's for the whole quarter, but this test that you helped them study for, they got an A, and you are ecstatic because of their success, their happiness. And so you have that sympathetic happiness, and it's your success too, because that's your best friend, and you did what you could to help them. And they abandoned that. Like, you're not supposed to take joy from anything you do for other people. You owe it to them. Like, that's so they've really destroyed this concept. Like, I've been looking into this more and more, and it has been basically turned on its side and forced to fit into communist propaganda. It's completely, when you hear people describe social emotional learning now, they're not talking about a classic psychological term. They're talking about political propaganda. He's also involved with Mental Health America and co-authored the City of Houston's inaugural public survey on mental health. Then it goes on to describe him in terms of scholarship, what his philosophies are and everything. And here we have, let's see, Baker's interest in scholarship is grounded in qualitative research methodologies, which are partnership-oriented. Doesn't sound bad at first. Humanizing, okay. Critically conscious. That's where we start getting into critical race theory, critical gender theory, right? And attentive to the traditionally extractive and paternalistic power dynamics between minoritized, underserved communities and academic research institutions.
Wow.
So we just dove headfirst into communism again, and feminist communism in particular.
It's a good thing that we're all getting our healthy serving of vegetables in that word salad today.
Like, at the beginning, it almost makes him, just sound completely innocent. Right? Qualitative research methodologies are supposed to be about making sure that your research isn't jumping to conclusions in an irrational factor, that you're not failing to consider, alternative possibilities to what you're concluding. You're not failing to make sure that you have ironclad testing and survey methods and so on, which in the social sciences they talk about a lot, but don't perform very well most of the time. But the rest of that, like, the only thing that is remotely good sounding, honestly, is the humanizing bit, and I don't believe that with it being connected to the rest of that it means the same thing to him as it means when, I think about it.
No way.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. There's no way that his idea of humanizing is the same as yours. Absolutely.
Then he goes on to academia. Baker collaborates with social movements and grassroots organizers, which is just vague, right? K-12 schools. K-12 schools is elementary schools and high schools, junior highs, middle schools. So he's talking about the public school system there more likely than not. Because there's also a K-12 homeschooling program, but I doubt that people using homeschooling have ever heard of this guy. Nonprofit organizations, socially responsible corporations, so the ESG folks, as well as faith communities, churches. So he has involvement, his fingers are in every little pie he can dip them into, right? And then we get into the communist activist language again. Community-based education, community-centered research, right? When they talk about that, they're not talking about serving the community. They're talking about controlling the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we have other organizations he's been involved with: the American Public Health Association, National Partnership for Education Access, the African American Male Initiative, the New York Urban League Young Professionals, and the First People's Fund, which I'm not sure, that kind of sounds communistic just because it has peoples in it, and that's often used by communists to make it themselves sound, well, to humanize themselves. Then there's something called Natal, N-A-T-A-L, and Pride in the Pews. So an organization intended to center homosexuality in the church.
That tells me a lot about him.
Yeah, so he's got his fingers in a lot of different pies. And then at the end, the cherry on top is he's received the award for excellence in promoting diversity inclusion from the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. So there you go. And also, his whole profile uses they, them pronouns. I'm not doing that. So, let's get, just so you know what we're looking at here, and we're not, this is not just some rando. Like I said, this is some mainstream bullshit here. This is a soldier in the social justice war telling his cohorts, this is our next weapon against men.
And now that we know what he does in his daily life, I kind of want to know what they them gets up to at night.
I don't. I really don't. I don't. Anybody that uses they them pronouns, I do not want to know what they do at night. Just that alone. Like I'm as much a fan of porn as the next person, but not they them pronouns. Like that totally kills it for me right there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That said, the title of the article says it all. Male survivors of abuse by women can heal without misogyny. I didn't even read the article before I picked it for the show.
Oh, God. I've read it.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's I can't even. Yeah. We'll get into it. It's brutal. Even just the first. I mean, even the title is bad enough, but even just the taglines are intolerable. It's ridiculous.
And I did read it after I picked it, but it's just like, we're doing this.
Christ.
I just read the byline for the first time, and I'm already sufficiently done with this dude. Oh God.
Well, see,
Yes,
it's
let's.
funny because he talks about how bias can prevent us from comprehending men as victims and women as perpetrators, and then like right in the key points is like a whole bunch of bias.
Yeah.
And like even in the title is a whole bunch of bias, and it's like, oh my God, learn what bias is.
This
Right.
this is the article that never stops. So our key points here. Lacking the language to unpack and articulate their pain can lead male survivors of abuse to scapegoat women.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. I've got to jump in here because, you know, like as most of you know, like I've been working as a registered provisional psychologist with male clients now, and many of those include male victims of domestic abuse. And you know, this is so ridiculously out of touch, this point. Like it's like I very much doubt that this guy has ever spoken to a male victim of domestic abuse, because if he had, you know, like they don't have that problem. They do not have that problem whatsoever. You know, they're just, you know, very often not explaining their pain probably in a way that these guys are at all familiar with. Because I have never had a problem with any male victims of domestic abuse that I have spoken to, and there has been no challenge with getting them to express the pains that they're going through, and it's often very deep and very complex. And so I don't know what kind of one-dimensional fakey cardboard cutout this guy's been talking to, but just get out of my face with this.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you know, furthermore, I have never, ever heard any of them scapegoating women as though, like, all women are the problem. In fact, most of them will bend over backwards to, like, minimize the abuse from their female partners, or, you know, try and excuse it in some way. And they'll talk about how, you know, they must have done something wrong to deserve it. Like, it's just out of touch in so many different ways. It's difficult to summarize it.
It is. I can, from my experience with guys that I've known that have been abused, you know, and I'm not a therapist, so I'm the friend that they talk to when they can't talk to the other guys about something. And so sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. You know, sometimes they'll talk to their buddies, and sometimes this is just not something they want their buddies to know happened. And I've been that friend for a lot of guys, actually. Once I got comfortable hearing very difficult things about people suffering, you know, because it is hard to... It can rip your heart out sometimes. And it's hard to not just be heartbroken all the time when you know terrible things have happened to somebody that you care about a lot, right? That you're buddies with, that you hang out with, play video games with, you know, play Dungeons and Dragons with, and that kind of thing. And they can explain what happened to them. Some guys are very... They'll go two different directions with it, in opposite directions with it. Some guys are very careful not to badmouth their abuser, because they've been raised never to say nasty things about women. And the guys that are the opposite, that will, you know, be perfectly happy to hold their abuser fully accountable, that'll use terms to describe her like, you know, that bitch did this to me, that whore did this to me, if she cheated on him in the process, if that was part of the abuse. You know, no holds barred, you know, whatever terms feminists will call misogynistic, they'll use them. And they'll differentiate between that cruel and sadistic person that hurt them and every other woman they know. They still talk about other women as friends, family members, loved ones, in terms of, you know, their character and their friendship and their closeness. But a lot of people if you call one woman a bitch and you're a man, a lot of people extrapolate that into, you think all women are bitches, you hate all women, you're misogynist.
Yeah. It's this really weird defensiveness around it. It's like there's a difference between insulting one person and being a misogynist. There's a world of difference. And it's bizarro how many people don't seem to understand that distinction.
Yeah. I think it's pretty excusable for someone to hate a person that poured boiling water on them in their sleep.
Yeah.
You know?
Think?
Or in the case of one of my friends, she threw cast iron skillets at him.
Oh my god.
Jesus.
Like, she picked up light fixtures and threw them, like lamps, desk lamps and floor lamps, and threw them at him. Big books, knickknacks, like those ceramic knickknacks and stuff. And just all kinds of stuff. And everybody else sort of treated it as a big joke because her aim was awful.
So, what did he do to deserve that, after all?
It was even dumber than that.
In someone else's dreams, perhaps.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the big fights, was that she dreamed he cheated on her, so she was holding it. She was sure it was a psychic dream. Like,
Oh my god.
that the guy with 2 jobs and no free time cheated on her. Yeah.
That about tracks.
Yeah. And you know, when it was the way he talked about the abuse was funny, because he would just talk about it as an argument. He would minimize it so much. He didn't even say a fight, because he wasn't fighting back. And since she missed all the time, I mean, he had to patch walls and clean ink off the floor and all kinds of interesting things. Not ink pen ink. She threw the printer at him.
Oh my gosh.
Good Lord.
Over an email.
And you know, like you said, like it wasn't a fight, and I find that that's true most of the time.
Yeah.
Because most of these guys will do anything they can to avoid not fighting back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you know, and he would say, it's like she's been taken over by a demon. And, you know, he was describing it. He had the language to describe it. His experience of it was that his wife was 2 people. The one that was, you know, sweet and kind and took care of him when he was sick and all that. And then when she would have a sudden fit of rage and jealousy, she was like, she was possessed by a demon. And this is not a small woman, right? She was almost 6 feet tall. She was an athlete in high school. And this was when I was in my early 20s. We were all in our 20s. So she wasn't old. She was still close to her high school athlete days. She wasn't weak. And it's a good thing nothing... You know, it's a good thing she was a crappy shot when she threw. But yeah, he was perfectly able to describe it. But he wasn't perfectly able to hold her accountable for her behavior. And that really, men don't lack the language to unpack and articulate their pain. But a lot of men have been raised to not hold women accountable and to be the shield between women and their accountability. And it really does, that wrecks male victims. And it didn't help that a lot of our friends thought it was funny because she kind of had a little Mickey Mouse voice. She was very... I don't know if you guys have seen Singing in the Rain, the musical, the old musical Singing in the Rain, and the bitchy woman, the bad actress in Singing in the Rain. It was a lot like that voice. But yeah, so it was just a situation where somebody like this might say lacking the language. No, they don't lack the language. But they have been trained to tolerate things they shouldn't. And it goes on, abuse by women can go unnoticed when it primarily involves relational aggression or psychological abuse.
Read not taken seriously.
Yeah.
Yes.
That one actually is true. And that happens
Yeah.
both ways, when their targets are male and when their targets are female. Yes,
absolutely.
Lena Lamont.
I mean, oh, sorry.
Lena Lamont's the answer, Sir Skeptic. She had the Lena Lamont voice. But go on, Prim.
I was just gonna say, it's amazing how often, like, when I try and talk about like male victims of domestic abuse, people will throw up that whole, but women take the majority of the violent abuse, so therefore, that's more important. And it's like, yep, let's just go ahead and minimize people's suffering just because other people have it worse.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just ridiculous on his face. Turn the tables around. If he was doing that to her, there's no way that they would be. Oh, what do you mean that's violent? What?
Well, exactly, really? Right? It's like if it was, finger quotes, just emotional abuse or psychological abuse, like, obviously they would say, "Girl, you don't deserve that. Get out of that house." And,
oh yeah.
Like, rightfully so, because nobody should be emotionally abused because it's a shitty thing to do, and that includes when it happens to men.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's one my husband's ex-wife was very skilled at. And I could be skilled at that if I wanted to. I'm very good at. I hate saying good at for this because it's a terrible thing to be good at. But if I get to know somebody, I'm fully capable of finding the most vulnerable emotional point and just twisting the knife around and around and around. And that's one of the reasons why I insisted in high school on getting some kind of anger management, because that's something that if you don't have control over the capability, then you become the reason that somebody has self-esteem issues for the rest of their life, or doesn't have relationships with people they should have relationships with, or doesn't go for the career that is best for them, or kills themselves. And never wanted to be that person. But the ex did. And she used it on all of us. My husband lived with her. They were married for like 6 years. She didn't quite make it to 7-year itch territory before she got the 7-year itch. But yeah, she was horrible to him. Just absolutely horrible. And it took a long time for me to be able to process, like, I'm gonna help him recover from this without, I'm gonna get revenge on this fucking bitch that hurt him. Like, it had to separate those two things. And just that, right? He's the same thing. Most of the people around them didn't understand what she did to him. And I don't know if all of his friends ever did fully understand. Like, everybody understood that he got healthier after they separated. Everybody understood that he seemed happier after she left him. And then even happier after we got together. But I don't know if people realize just how much of a prison she put him in. And she's another one that did the "I dreamed you did this, and it's your fault that I'm angry."
What is it with that? There's like an archetype of women that are just willing to go off their dreams based on absolutely nothing, and then become super abusive for it. It's like, it's your head that came up with this shit.
Yeah, you ask yourself, why did you dream about this? And you might just be led back to, I'm very insecure in my situation, or you might be led back to, I don't trust this person, and then you have to consider why you don't trust that person. And I went through that process once. I had a nightmare that one of my friends, this was back when I was a Wiccan, and I had a nightmare that one of my friends sacrificed me, like, with a big knife, and I felt it. I woke up still in pain. It was really one of those, like, and the first thing I was just like, why the hell did that come into my head? Why did my head write that story about this friend? So I started going back and re-examining, do I distrust this person? What's going on? And in our friend group, I realized I was being subjected to story after story. I didn't have a name for them at the time, but threat narrative after threat narrative, where I was the bad guy and I had to make up for it, and she was victimized by something I had done, and most of them didn't even make sense. But people just accepted them. So she basically was sacrificing me over and over again for social cred. But
well, I mean, it's funny too, because I mean, people will put so much stock in these dreams where something horrible happens to them or their loved one does something to them, but then they'll have a dream that they're flying through a cloud of cotton candy with like unicorns flying around and stuff, and somehow those ones aren't given a lot of weight, right? It's like,
well, that usually means I'm hungry.
Well, right, exactly.
I do dream about food when I'm hungry.
Bullshit.
But my process with that was, all right, so I'm not gonna be mad at this person. This is probably her nature, and nobody's ever called her out on it. And I'm gonna start a fight about it. I'm going to start engaging in some social self-defense. And when I started watching for the next threat narrative, didn't realize what a borderline. I didn't know anything about borderline personality disorder at the time. Nothing. So when I started defending against the threat narrative, shit hit the fan. But that was the approach, not yelling and screaming and blaming and shaming, right? But if you're narcissistic, if you're insecure, if you have BPD or you have some other disorder that causes similar, like sometimes bipolar disorder can do this. You have a lot of insecurity with bipolar. Sometimes and a lot of attention seeking, and a lot of attention monopolizing. And when that happens, you get somebody that like gets very upset if they're not getting what they want from you. And that basically is what happened. She didn't get what she wanted from the whole group, and just went ballistic and threw a screaming temper tantrum, and then threw several email temper tantrums, then divorced her husband and moved to Texas. Now he's happily married to someone else. So there we go. Like, like relational aggression abuse can be pretty terrible, but people don't talk about it as much because women do it more. Men can do it too, and there are male abusers that do this to their female partners, and it flies under the radar just as much, I think, until it gets to the point where the woman starts showing symptoms of trauma, and then people start getting her out of there. When the man starts showing symptoms of trauma, people start blaming him. Next bullet point. Advocates often forget that internalized patriarchy can manifest in women as a need for control over others. Because it's not their fault. It's the patriarchy made me violent.
Oh my god. Because women can't just have a desire to control their partners.
No.
We have to attribute it to some kind of horrible male attribute, right?
That's how powerful men are. They can control women just, they don't even have to think about it. It's just the men that control their actions.
Oh my god, this is just the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. I read this the first time and I nearly spat out my drink. It was ridiculous.
But guys, ambition is only something that men have. But there should be just as many female CEOs as male CEOs. Despite
this almost sounds like the write-up for the Barbie movie.
Yeah. So now we get into the meat of the article. There are two commonly understood reasons why we fail to comprehend women's victimization of men as abuse. The point of this post is to present a third compelling reason. then unpack the implications for professional helpers, attorneys, investigators, therapists, victims advocates, and so on, who, in their work, may come across male survivors of abuse by women. May? It's a guarantee. It is a guarantee. Even in my line of work, I have come across male survivors of abuse by women, both among coworkers and people that I have taken care of.
Yeah. It depends if they feel comfortable enough to disclose it, because the research shows that they've tried to disclose to some kind of support network before and have, been treated like some kind of perpetrator. Odds are good that they're not going to feel comfortable reaching out again.
Well, and a lot of times it's not because the guy tells anything. I'm currently working with intellectually disabled adults, but I've also been a nurse's aide. So it's same level of medical care, bottom rung. You can't get any less formally educated in medicine and have a job in medicine than nurse's aide or direct support professional. Like, nurse's aide courses are 3 weeks long, direct support professional courses are 2 weeks long. So, and then we have continuing education in CPR and MedPass certification, and whatever our company wants us to know, right? But when a male patient is under care like that, especially if they're under guardianship, like if they don't have the capacity to communicate and advocate for themselves and stuff like that, or they're just completely physically and somewhat mentally disabled, because with old age you get senility, you get post-concussion syndrome in a lot of men, especially if they've had hard jobs, they've survived because they had care as veterans. They've had, like, I took care of World War II veterans in both of the nursing homes that I worked at. And sometimes it's not that they don't talk about it, it's that they don't have the communication capabilities that they used to have anymore, and they can't. But the perpetrator is so bold that she gets caught. And that's how you find out. And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of things are explained. This is why this guy has been avoiding the shower. This is why this guy doesn't like to be alone, with this particular person, or things like that. And it's, you look back and the first thing that occurs to you is, why didn't I figure this out? Well, he couldn't tell you. But yeah, while this under-discussed problem warrants more visibility for many reasons, chief among them is the reality. This is chief among them, not just, some side, right? Little, by the way, this can happen, which would, that could be fair. By the way, if the abuse is really bad, it can turn them against all women. Well, that happens with both sexes. Women who are abused sometimes turn against all men, too, and it hurts their relationships with people that are family or friends they've had, co-workers, ruins their chances if they're heterosexual at forming functional relationships in the future with partners, and stuff, right? And that can happen with men too. But that would be, you would treat that as a side issue. It doesn't happen every time, right? No, chief among them is the reality that we create more misogynists.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we don't actually care about the male victims. We don't care about their well-being or any other struggles they may have. We worry about hurting the women's.
Mm-hmm. And his reasoning is by neglecting the healing of male survivors of abuse, right? So, more misogynist, someone with a strong hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women. Not fear of. He hasn't listed fear of, which is funny because feminists say if you have a fear of women, you're a misogynist. By neglecting the healing of male survivors of abuse by women. Lacking the tools and language to unpack. There he goes again. Lacking the tools and language to unpack and articulate their pain can lead male survivors of abuse to scapegoat all women and sometimes, by extension, gender non-conforming folks, too.
Oh, good Lord. Come on. Dude, we just had to throw that in there as well. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's enough that you're painting these guys as, they just ooga booga. I don't know how to talk. What are feelings? What? Come on, are you kidding me?
He goes into the psychiatrist's office.
Yeah, no kidding.
I got pain. No, they know how to speak about their pain.
Yeah.
Who is listening to them, and how are they interpreting that discussion? You know what I mean? How are they determining whether or not this person is necessarily in need, like something actually happened? Oh no, men just don't. They just don't know how to talk about their abuse. That's fucking bullshit. Okay, they would love for anyone to listen and hear about the shit that they go through. Okay, they just don't feel like they can get it from anywhere because women don't care. And then when they do, what happens to them? They get thrown this shit in their face. Oh, you just hate women.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Right.
Well, or if women care, sometimes they don't care by having compassion for the guy. They care by being afraid that the guy isn't going to be as strong for them as he was before, and as useful to them as he was before.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
exactly. So they don't. Guys don't necessarily, for instance, want to tell their partners, their female partners, about abuse.
The focus
because of that.
here isn't on healing these harmed men. The focus is on making sure they don't become abusers themselves, that they don't become misogynists.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that they don't place the blame on women. We can't talk about the women. It's not women's fault, guys, that you were abused by women, which none of these guys are really saying. Okay,
it's just the internalized patriarchy.
Internalized patriarchy. Yes, I had a bowl of patriarchy this morning. It was delicious. Oh wait, that was cream of wheat.
Oh shit! I had that too.
So hard to tell the difference.
You see, technically, if you want to get serious, it's your own fault because it's the internalized patriarchy that did
it. Oh, Jesus, Pete.
Gross.
Yep, and of course we know that patriarchy is evil, right? And I just want to make you think about something here too. When feminists talk about patriarchy, like if you look at anything they've written about it, trying to describe it, trying to explain it, trying to define it, they won't actually come out and say, here is the definition of patriarchy theory. But everything they say, if you boil it down to just the nitty-gritty, take all the water out of it, take all the fanciness out of it, they are saying that everything feminists consider bad about civilization is that way because men designed civilization to oppress women for men's benefit. That is the underlying premise of patriarchy theory, which is really just conjecture because it's never been proved. And when you talk to them about it and you ask for proof, they will give you examples of female disadvantage or give you examples of restrictions or obligations that have been placed on women under historical law and policy without considering the experiences of men under that same law and policy where they also had obligations and restrictions. And the reason that the women had their obligations and restrictions was to facilitate the male obligation to take care of, to provide for, to protect, be responsible for the female. So you can't take out a loan in his name because he has to pay it. And that's not discrimination against you because you're not paying your debt. Just things like that, right? So they'll do that, and then when you point out men faced hardship, men's hardship and women's hardship were related, and they were connected in this manner. Men were responsible for women. Women were obligated to not get in the way of men fulfilling that responsibility. And they get upset, right? It's not the same. It's not the same. Why? Well, because it wasn't done to them because they were men. Oh, really? How do you prove that? How do you prove that being men wasn't the reason that they were made responsible for women? So patriarchy conjecture, because it isn't a real theory, relies on circular reasoning. Women had hardship. Well, yeah, so did men. Well, it's not the same when men had it. Well, what's the evidence of that? Well, it wasn't done to them because they were men. It was just done to them. And men were responsible for it. Whereas women were oppressed. Right? Women's hardship was a feature of their oppression and discrimination. Well, how do you know? Because women had hardship.
Right.
So patriarchy, it says that this system that doesn't exist, the feminist patriarchy, already deprives boys and men of emotional freedom and outlets. Which is bullshit. It does not.
No. I mean, it just sounds stupid right there. Patriarchy, right? This is the thing that's supposed to... Men are in control of everything. How would it deprive men and boys of anything? Of anything. Right?
Right, exactly.
And patriarchy lets them do whatever the hell they want. So why wouldn't they have the emotional freedom to, say whatever is feeling, to talk about what hurts them? Of course they would. Of course. This is so stupid. How?
Well, it's funny that they have this whole image in their mind of like these men in like the shadows sitting around a table at the penthouse of a 50-story building or something, just like they're standing around and they're like controlling all the women, and then they're also saying like, you're not allowed to show emotions either, men, but we're the patriarchy and we are here for men. And I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense.
Well, you have to ask Patriarchy Central on Twitter. He'll explain everything. That's a real account. But and so the article says it's that the appropriate range of emotional expression boys and men can engage in is limited, right? Doesn't say who specifically is responsible, just that it's patriarchy, right? So you think about this. Who shames men and boys for getting angry?
Women! Only women!
Who responds to the complaints of non-custodial fathers, for instance, by calling them angry white men, even though a huge portion of the ones that are activists trying to remedy the situation of mothers being able to alienate children from their parents are black fathers that have been pushed out of their families. Those angry white black men.
That sounds like a feminist cause, if I ever did hear one.
Mm-hmm.
They're all deadbeats anyway. I mean, who really cares, right?
Right. But who treats men as a threat for expressing loneliness?
You're not entitled to our company.
Yeah. Who?
I mean, it's not like the government is looking into certain cells of people online that may or may not have, some different opinions about women and society. And oh my God, they might be dangerous. We might need to keep an eye on these guys who never left their mother's basement.
Yep. Who is it that created a body of research to try to demonize men for being lonely and sad about being lonely and trying to figure out how to cope with being lonely or how to solve the problem of their loneliness? It certainly wasn't the patriarchy. Feminists have actually now started creating a body of research. They're trying to create a mental disorder out of being an incel.
Right.
But yeah, it's totally the patriarchy that keeps men from expressing their feelings. And because we socialize boys and men to externalize emotions, to perpetuate this emotional void for male survivors of abuse by women, is to perpetuate their vulnerability at our own expense. So
wait, what? Wait, what? It's like, do we deprive them of emotional freedom and outlets, or do we socialize them to externalize their emotions?
And exactly what is that? Is that
both?
It's your fault I'm angry? Is that externalizing an emotion?
That doesn't I mean, there's an inconsistency in this paragraph. Like, how do you, like, somebody didn't proofread this for all of the letters after this guy's name. Well, maybe he needs to take a basic English course or something, because like
he's got an ABC. He's got an ABCD PhD, and he knows better than you. So, you know.
He doesn't have a PhD.
He's got a master's.
The same level of educational clout as this jackass does.
It doesn't matter. He's got something. He's got a title, and he's gonna wear that shit till the day that he dies. Okay.
Well, to be fair, this guy did write for BuzzFeed, and I didn't.
Yeah, I know that takes almost everything off of the table. But I think what he meant to say instead of externalize is internalize. Right? I think that would make more sense with what he's trying to say. And because we socialize boys and men to internalize emotions, to perpetuate this emotional void for I don't know, maybe I'm off.
No, you see, we tell boys and men to externalize their emotions by punching their girlfriend in the face, right? Like, that's why we have such a hard time viewing the fact that they can be victims of domestic abuse. Yeah. Sorry, a little bit of gallows humor there, but I mean, frankly, it's not far off from my own experiences.
Well, and we do have this issue of feminists treating men, like, they talk about women's way of knowing, right? That women have a different way of observing the world around them and intuiting information, conclusions from information that maybe they haven't consciously realized that they've paid attention to, but subconsciously they did, and all that kind of, some of that's utter bullshit. Some of it's got basis in truth, but they've warped it into something that turns it into a lie. Right? Like, like saying, oh, the car is red, the car reflects red light, and warping it into, don't touch the car, it's red hot, you'll burn your fingers. That's just because it's red, you were right about it being red, but no, it's not gonna burn your fingers. Men have different ways of expressing their emotions sometimes than women do, and a lot of it is rooted around women help seek, right? Women seek validation. Women seek bonding over their emotions, over describing and analyzing their emotions. Men seek solutions to the problems related to the emotions, and they take action based on that. And my brother described to me when we were in, I want to say high school, maybe college, the moment in time when he stopped crying about things that upset him when he was a kid. And it was a conscious decision. But it wasn't a conscious decision because he was embarrassed and thought people were looking down on him for it. He just found it useless. And so something had happened and he was upset about it and he was crying, and all of a sudden it occurred to him, like, why am I doing this? This isn't helping. I'm not going to make the situation any better. I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm going to go and, start changing the situation. And that's what he did thereafter. Like, there's sometimes, he cried when mom died. He cried when dad died. Because that's pain that there's nothing you can do to change that situation. But he also, when he moved away from the family, restarted a family business like the one he was raised in, and sort of threw himself into that. So it's a totally different way of missing your family and processing your emotions and everything. I will do something functional and beneficial. My brother-in-law, when he passed away, his son finished his last art project so that it wouldn't be unfinished. He didn't want his dad to have something left unfinished. And like that's the kind of women don't necessarily do that. Some of us do, but a lot of women don't, and it's perfectly fine for women to sit around and cry until snot runs down their faces, and men to do something different to deal with pain and suffering, and they're both valid. But we don't have room for that in our society. If what women do is to be considered valid, people treat it like it has to be the only thing that's valid. So the first misconception, he says, the first commonly understood reason we overlook the victimization of men by women is that men disproportionately victimize women by a long shot, which is false. Statistics actually show that 2/3 of domestic violence is two-way, and of the domestic violence that is one way, it consistently shows up that around 70% of it is female-perpetrated. So another way of putting that, most of the time when there's domestic violence, the target hits back. When the target doesn't hit back, around 70% of the time, that's a man. That target is a man.
Yeah.
Men are 70% of the people, the victims of domestic violence, who don't defend themselves with violence.
Well, yeah, and this is just talking about the physical aspect, right? Like, even this guy said above in his key points that abuse by women can go unnoticed when it primarily involves relational aggression or emotion or psychological abuse. So it's like, well, when we account for all of these factors, things narrow a lot more than he is claiming. So the fact that he is saying this after having that in one of his key points is extremely disingenuous.
Yep.
And just it's just so brutal.
He goes on to say, to invite anyone, but especially men, into this discussion while simultaneously minimizing men's disproportionate enactment of violence against women would not only be disingenuous, but telling of an anti-feminist agenda that I do not endorse.
Oh my god.
Because
can I just put an air horn on the mic right now? Like, I don't have a better response.
Because you have to protect women at all costs. And it's just disgusting. It's just disgusting. Women can do no wrong. Oh my, I live in this guy's world. Go and live in this guy's world where I can just go and fucking trample all over his rights. I'm gonna move into his house. I'm gonna eat all of his fucking groceries. I'm gonna shit in his toilet, clog it up, and I'm just gonna, whatever.
Excuse you. He's not a he. He's a they them. So therefore.
Excuse me, they, them. Well, you about to get a taste of this motherfucking equality, okay, bitch? No, this is so... Again, I said it already. This is stupid! This is fucking... Just the insane ramblings of someone who has been so misguided through life. I mean, it feels almost like he has been beaten down by every woman who ever raised him, because I doubt that he had a father in his life. I really do.
Yeah, it's very possible that he didn't. I mean, that's becoming prevalent in our society. So there is that. And of course, he went through university in a field that is dominated by feminism. So it's a guarantee that he was told to sit down and shut up and listen to women over and over again until he became a matriarchy-loving, patriarchal womanist. You know? Like, that's
well,
just...
I mean, like, you can see the attempts to distance from the patriarchy. Like, he talks like it's outside him because, you know, they, them, and whatnot.
Yes.
So it's very transparent and kind of embarrassing. Like, no, actually, really embarrassing. And
This is basically
just
article writer for... I'm obedient, I'm a good boy, I'm gonna write about this men's issue, but do not beat me.
Really
I have
is.
paid homage to women's greater victimhood and men's being worse than women, worse people than women.
It really is telling of an anti-feminist agenda that I do not endorse. Like, okay, like, seriously, like, just blink in Morse code if you are in trouble, my guy. Like, seriously, let's come and get you out of this nonsense.
Cheers, yeah. I, for one, welcome our new feminist overlords. Oh, jeez. He goes on. I am keenly aware of how men lacking in structural historical power analysis of gender and sex. So men who have not had the feminist narrative imposed on them through academic speak, basically. That's what that means, right?
Right.
Routinely hold feminism to an ideological purity test that no framework can pass. Yes, actually could. But to keep dismissing it, keep deflecting.
Is that? I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Ideological purity, like exactly what is he referring to there? Is he complaining that when we get told feminism is about equality, and then feminists abandon the idea of equality anytime accountability comes into the discussion, we view them as hypocrites, and we don't consider their ideology valid if they can't be consistent? That's what he's talking about? Because that's what it sounds like he's talking about. So he goes on. This no framework can pass this ideological purity test. To keep dismissing it, keep deflecting, and keep evading accountability.
What are we meant to be taking accountability for? You are talking about male victims of domestic abuse. What are they meant to be taking accountability for, you giant asshole? You are so insensitive. I can't even deal with it. I'm sorry, like, I keep inserting my clients that are going through this into the room with this guy saying these things, and I can feel the pain on their face as they hear what this guy is saying, and I'm just like, I'm just enraged at it. I feel like I have to jump to the defense of these guys because this is disgusting.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
So his next bit. The intent of this post is not to invalidate women survivors of abuse by men, or to invalidate feminism's immense contribution to survivor discourse. That's his whole... So, his disclaimer was half the page, I think.
This post isn't talking about female survivors.
Right. I was like, what are you what happened to the men you're supposed to be talking about? No, he goes right back into the fucking women.
Okay, you know what? Okay, I'm just gonna back up and take a breath for a sec, and I'm going to give him an iota of slack here because I'm just having flashbacks to when I was trying to publish my own paper on male victims of domestic abuse, and the one peer reviewer that was getting in my way, that was saying, oh, you're minimizing female victims of domestic abuse. And then in order to get the paper actually published, I kind of had to throw in a whole little section, like an homage to female victims, in order to just say, this is not to discriminate against females. Yes, I had to do that in order to get past this one peer reviewer. So like I get it. I get the structures that are in place currently that are maintaining this kind of mentality, but like holy crap though, this guy's laying it on thick.
And those are, by the way, feminist structures. It is feminists who say you are not allowed to have compassion for men without first paying homage to women's greater victimhood and pointing out men's greater perpetration. And it doesn't matter that neither of those things is true. It doesn't matter that women are not bigger victims, that there are not more female victims than male victims. It is not true that there are more male perpetrators than female perpetrators.
Yeah.
Right? It is not, none of that's true. But you still have to say it.
And it just reeks of insecurity too. It's like, you know, you're undermining your own point, really, by insisting that the spotlight always be on you, that we can't possibly talk about anything else, otherwise we are taking power away from your situation. Like, if you really legitimately believed in your heart of hearts that female victimization was just as important, you wouldn't have to sit here and defend it against other claims. You would just be able to comfortably acknowledge that, yes, this is a serious thing that women experience that is really bad and that requires services that are fortunately often in place in many areas. And there can also be male victims of domestic abuse that unfortunately do not have the same level of services available to them. And therefore we need to address that. And that's not taking away from women victims. Like, I don't get it. It's not a competition.
You know, it honestly, in my opinion, it speaks to the level at which they believe what they're saying. There is no one more insecure about whether or not people understand and believe what they're saying than a serial liar.
Yeah.
Like, those are the people that are the most insecure about being trusted. It's the most untrustworthy people. Even the falsely accused, who should be insecure about being believed because people treat them like they're lying when they're not. Even they do not demonstrate the level of insecurity that a serial liar, that pathological liars have. And feminist ideologues exhibit that same level of insecurity. They, somewhere within their psychology, whether it's right up in the forefront or buried under a bunch of psychobabble, they know that what they're saying is not true, that the talking points that they use are based on data that's biased, that's come from biased sources, that are based on incomplete looks at the facts, the information, the data, that they're treating the same conditions and pressures differently depending on whether they are affecting a man or a woman, and they're treating the same behaviors differently depending on whether a man or woman exhibits them. They know that. They're aware of that on some level. It's why they're insecure about being challenged, because they know they can't really defend anything they're saying. And I don't know, if you've ever had, I know at least, Prim, you have had a close relationship with a narcissist. And they're like that all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't necessarily know about narcissism, but I mean, I'm 99.9% sure that my mother is a BPD, which is really not far off. And so
they happen together a lot. I've noticed that the two diagnoses happen together a lot.
Well, and I mean, it really is all about, deflecting that personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And just like, oh, it's everybody else that's doing it's everybody else that's doing the bad thing. Not me. I'm perfect. I've got it all figured out. I've got it. So it's got to be you. It's got to be everybody else.
Yep, and you get to hear lie upon lie from them to shape their reality around the thing they're trying to protect, the original narrative they're trying to protect. And eventually it becomes to the degree of like cartoonish, childish, magical thinking. And then you get into the weeds of, well, you're being abusive by challenging my cartoonish, childish, magical thinking. You're responsible for the affair because I dreamed about it, and therefore it must be real. Like, okay, well then how about, maybe you just leave. But, yeah, like that's, and of course, this guy has to pay homage to female victims. Like nobody else has ever cared about female victims. They're so insecure. And the reason, it's not the victims that are insecure, right? It's the accusers that aren't victims. It's the grifters that make their money supporting the accusers that aren't victims. Those are the people that are real, honest-to-God victims do not want their experiences used to take away from somebody else's ability to recover. So he goes on, 6 years ago, I published Unharm Your Sons, a plea to black fathers about the culture of toxic masculinity.
Oh, boy.
In an environment where a rather large majority of black fathers get kicked out of their sons' lives by black mothers.
Right.
Or white mothers, depending on who they've had sex with.
Oh my God, I'm just reading the rest of this paragraph before we even get to it, and I'm just astounded by how much this guy cannot stay on task.
In which I explain how dominator culture has always been the basis of the patriarchal socialization of males, and to this day still is. There you go.
I'm just like having to scroll up and be like, okay, how many paragraphs has it been now since this guy has actually talked about the topic that he is purporting to be talking about?
Yeah.
Right.
No, he's all over the place, just like with all of his accomplishments that we read in the beginning. He's all over the place.
Yep.
All over the place. And I mean, I don't understand this. A plea to black fathers.
Even reading ahead, he still doesn't talk about it.
What
Like,
are they
I'm
supposed
sorry,
to do about it if they're not allowed to see their kids? What are they supposed to do about it?
I'm sorry for spoilers, but like, Jesus Christ, like even in the next 3 paragraphs, he's not talking about.
I know. We have to touch on every single feminist myth here, guys. Boys have always been socialized to be rulers or warriors.
What?
Not self-nurturers or nurturers of others. So doctors and firemen don't exist, guys. That's never happened, and the world has never produced men who do things like rescuing people in danger, treating the sick, taking care, helping the poor. Men don't.
So like one of my favorite male psychologists that I consider like an inspiration for my own work is Carl Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saying, just putting that out there, like, the father of unconditional positive regard and empathy and all that good shit. Like, yeah, no, it's not self-nurturers, not a nurturer of others.
Yeah.
Nope. Yep. Nope. Definitely
Yeah, it's not like the people who traditionally tried to understand human psychology for centuries were mostly men or anything either.
Right, exactly.
How do we help people?
It's not like that's not been a talking point of feminists for ages about how much of a boys' club initial psychology was.
Right.
Right? Like it's they can't even keep it consistent.
Nope. No, it was like all those guys didn't exist. They were in charge. They kept women out. They monopolized caring about people's mental health, but they didn't care.
Yeah.
He goes on to say that in most societies, manhood has been defined by maintaining power and control over others. I always thought it was getting shit done, but and encroaching and imposing, he says. And conversely, womanhood has been defined by maintaining control over oneself. Self-doubting and shrinking.
Wait a minute.
No.
Question mark?
Oh my god.
over oneself or over all of the fucking children that she chooses to have. She's never just
The concept of venting is an historical female behavior, right? An historically female behavior. Hysteria it used to be considered a mental health condition, was a term specifically for female behavior. Right? You didn't see men getting hysterical because they were not allowed.
Right.
They had to maintain control over themselves.
The weak one. Right. You're the weakest link in the chain, and we can't have you.
Because manhood has been defined historically not by maintaining power and control over others, but by being the shield between others and every threat in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Maintaining power and control over what can get to my people. Right? That is where men maintain power and control. Masculinity has been defined by getting shit done.
Right.
Masculinity has been defined by self-sacrifice for the greater good of the community. The community needs electricity. We're going to go deep underground where there's poisonous gas and big holes and it's dark and we don't know what all animals are in there, and they might be dangerous. Some of them might be venomous. There's all kinds of things that can happen in a coal mine. Collapses. There have been many, many men killed when tunnels collapsed. Methane and what's the one that's carbon monoxide that you can't smell? Because you can smell methane, right? The concept of the canary in a coal mine is that a bird takes less time to die from carbon monoxide poisoning than a human, right? And they send the bird in first, and then if the bird survives, then they send in the humans. It doesn't always guarantee that you're not going to run into a pocket, right?
The men. They send in the men.
The men, right? Well, and here's the other thing: like when women did work in coal mines, upper class women complained.
They pitched a fit. They pitched a fucking fit.
Yes.
How dare you have these young women working in these conditions? Oh my God, it's such a travesty. Never mind.
Members of parliament went in and observed, got upset, and eliminated their jobs.
Right.
So little boys had to do them instead.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have women meeting these harsh conditions. We can't have women working in these harsh conditions. Let's put some children in there instead.
Right.
But specifically the male ones. Right. So manhood has not been defined by maintaining power. A handful of men have power. And the vast, overwhelming majority
do not.
They have responsibilities and obligations, right? So there you go. But this is what we get. Consequently, boys will be boys. We had to hear that phrase. Often excuses and rationalizes boys' bad behavior to the point that good boys are often no better than bad girls. Really?
What?
Oh.
This is another feminist myth. Boys Will Be Boys is strictly about guys getting grass stains on their pants because they were playing sandlot football. It's not
or
an
like
excuse.
accidentally breaking a window or something.
It's not used as an excuse for boys to encroach on other people's boundaries against their will. It's not an excuse for boys to be abusive, aggressive, mean, and all that. Yes, boys will settle their differences between each other with tests of physical strength and endurance and pain endurance. They'll fight. They'll come up with weird things like that sissy test that they made up when I was in elementary school, where you erase a hole into your skin to see if you're tough enough to handle the pain.
Oh my God.
They stopped doing it when I got the girls to start calling it a dummy test. If you're dumb enough to let somebody talk you into doing that to your arm, because it made me sad to see the boys with injuries. And, like, those were my buddies. But so I just called it the idiot test. Are you the dummy test? Yeah, you let somebody talk you into doing that, you're a dummy. You failed. But yeah, they want to make it out that it's about boys doing bad things to girls, right? But who's the one that has to hear, oh, she kicked you in the shin, it's because she likes you.
Right.
Right? I mean, who's the one that has to be warned by his dad, don't get upset when you go on your first date and she only orders a salad and then she, like, finagles food off of your plate instead of ordering food for herself and eating what she wanted. Like, just stupid things. Boys' boundaries get treated as an attack on girls. But yeah, the power over versus power with expectation for boys not only increases the likelihood that boys become abusive, but also increases societal confusion about where to draw the line between patriarchal ideas of male strength and patriarchal abuse.
Okay, but, like, again, why are we talking about boys becoming abusive and patriarchal abuse? This is supposed to be about male victims of abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, how are we still on this? I don't get it.
Yes, so is he ever
topic.
going to mention male victims?
Right? Like, what are you doing?
He says, the convergence of all these social factors make it more likely that the typical person struggles to comprehend male victims as victims. So, now what he's basically saying here is, because you have this idea that it's normal and natural and socially normalized for men to be abusive, you can't view them as vulnerable enough to be victims. That's his thing. So the typical person struggles to comprehend male victims as victims and abusive men by women as real abuse. What he doesn't realize that he is admitting is that feminist narratives that generalize and demonize the entire male population as deadbeats and abusers make it hard for feminists to recognize male victims of abuse. The second misconception, and I don't know if we'll get all the way through this or not. The second misconception, commonly understood, or second commonly understood reason we overlook the victimization of men by women and girls, and women are socialized to be aggressive in a relation. This is a badly written sentence. The second commonly understood reason we overlook the victimization of men by women is that girls and women are socialized to be aggressive in a relational manner. He didn't grow up with the girls I grew up with. That is, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. That can inflict pain without fear of force. Oh, and socially, yes. They can inflict pain without fear of force. I think I brought up in the past.
Are we socialized to be that? Because I don't know. I never got that message growing up. I don't know about you guys, but
no,
it depends on where you grow up.
You probably had a functioning family. I think this is actually indicative of the children that grew up without their fathers in their homes, because this is how women, boys and girls both, when the father is not home, they have to over exemplify this defensiveness and this aggression, right? This, you're not going to come into my space, because they don't really have their natural protector in the home. And the mother just doesn't cut it, right? So I think boys and girls that grow up in these situations, they develop this kind of rigidness.
There is that.
That's just what I think. All right,
sure. There is that. Growing up without a father, a person does become more intolerant of differences, with other people. If and they can become more aggressive as well, and that does cause both sexes to have trouble. Criminal trouble, actually, in greater numbers than if they had their father in the home. But I also noticed that, you have two distinct classes of people, sort of economically and socially. Even though, you have rich, middle class, and poor and all that, you also have, if you draw a line, right in the middle of middle class, you have everything under that line, where the women have jobs because they can't afford not to, and so mom works, kids get put into daycare, they spend a lot of time. When I was a kid, I grew up with latchkey kids. For the millennials and the zoomers, a latchkey kid was a kid who carried a key, often on a shoestring around their neck, or around their wrist, that when they would get out of school, they'd ride the bus home, or they would walk home, unaccompanied by an adult, by the way, and then they would enter their home, and there would be nobody home. They would go inside, they would lock the door, they would make themselves a sandwich, and they would watch TV until mom got home. And they would be alone in the house until mom got home. And they might be as young as kindergarten age and still be alone in the house for, half hour, an hour, till mom got home from work. That was normal when I was a kid in school. I started kindergarten in 1978. So that was a long time ago. Right? But they didn't, for the most part, they didn't get hurt. Sometimes they did things they weren't allowed to do, because you weren't going to get caught, right? But aside from that, it was not that big of a deal to us. There was a park 2 doors down from my house when I was growing up, and we all played at that park together. We played sandlot football, we played monkey bar tag, which I scared the shit out of the other kids' parents playing monkey bar tag, because I would jump across the monkey bars and stuff like a monkey. And some of the boys did that. I was the only girl that did it. But I was pretty flexible, right? And the kids would do things that, you could really get hurt doing. Jumping from monkey bar to tree, doing battle on top of the Rocky Horse toy, see who could knock the other person off, climbing on top of the swing set, just weird shit that you don't get away with doing if your mom's around. And every so often, somebody's mom would come across to the park from one of the houses that faced the park and say, hey, don't do that, you're going to get hurt. Or stop a fight if it was getting out of hand, stuff like that. And sometimes they did. I got fish hooked in the mouth by another girl once over a Faygo bottle, an empty Faygo bottle that we were using in the sandbox, Reed kitty litter box outdoors in the park, to pour water in the sand so we could make sand castles and shit, right? And another girl wanted it, and she didn't say, hey, let me have that. She just started a fight. And that was how the kids in my neighborhood were. You know, we duked it out a lot. We hit each other a lot. We wrestled a lot. We learned to negotiate as we got older because we didn't like getting punched. And that's what boys do in pretty much all of civilized society and uncivilized society. They grow up learning that. You find negotiation a lot less painful than getting into a fist fight, right? But on the other side of town, the girls were taught to be young ladies. You didn't lower yourself to engage in physical violence. That was for lowlifes like me, right? You simply stopped associating with the person that made you angry. You know, you got political about it, basically. Relational aggression is politics. And in neighborhoods where the family can afford for mom to be a stay-at-home mom without any kind of a side hustle, no selling Avon, no none of that shit, just flat out stay-at-home mom, has can afford to be paying more attention to the kids all the time. That's the way little girls grow up. They learn to politic instead of engaging in physical violence. So my experience with relational aggression was it didn't exist, really, until I hit junior high and started attending class with girls from the nice side of town. And that's where I met the "you can't sit with us" plastics mean girls, right? The movie Mean Girls portrayed. Now, in my class, my age group, those girls grew out of that by the end of the 7th grade. And it's probably because in my class, we had some kids who faced difficulties that were so profound that the rest of us couldn't even comprehend them. We had a boy in our class in particular who had muscular dystrophy, and he passed away halfway through my 7th grade year. And we all learned a lot from him about how to treat people and how to relate to each other. And I don't think any of us realized how much until we became adults and started thinking back about, childhood, right? But the girls had that in them. They had that capability, and they do that kind of thing. And all my life I've run into women that do that and girls that do that, even though the girls that I went to school with matured out of it, I think, more quickly than normal because of getting to know some kids. He wasn't the only person, but if we wanted to have friendship with him and have a community with him as classmates, we couldn't just say, well, you got to bend to how we do things. We had to gear how we did things around making room for him, because he couldn't change his situation. We could change ours, right? So that was something that we learned that I don't know, not everybody learns that at 13 years old. So I don't know if that helps to understand, but if you have had experience with relational aggression in girls, mine is that what feminists and Marxists would term privilege makes room for that to become a girl's primary means of manipulating people around her. Where what they would term a lack of privilege or oppression or whatever. I never really felt oppressed growing up just because I lived on the other side of town. That eliminates room for that to be the primary means by which a girl wants to manipulate the people around her, and she resorts to the same methods that boys do, and she learns the same lessons that boys do about negotiation and cooperation being preferable to violence and conflict. So, but yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't prevent relational aggression from being viewed as the primary means by which women abuse. I don't think it is. I think that there are a lot of women that, when they're faced with wanting to control a man, they know that he can't hit back, or at least he's not supposed to. And so they'll inflict violence on him. Like physical violence, even if they're usually accustomed, when they're dealing with girls, to spread rumors and say, you can't sit with us. So he claims girls and women's heightened relationality is at least partially a byproduct of patriarchal domination. Oh God, really? It can be traced back to patriarchal pressure, economically, legally, and religiously, for women to prioritize becoming mothers and wives, as well as the need for interpersonal support when healing from men's unwanted sexual advances.
Oh, God.
Okay, so he's made some statements here as if certain factors are true, and he put those statements together in a paragraph, but he did nothing to show how they relate to each other.
Right. Like, there's a lot of reaching going on here that's just like linking things together, and it's like, okay, but you kind of have to show your work on this one.
What this makes me actually think of? Movie Stripes, where I can't remember the other character. John Candy's character is constantly, he wants the top bunk, if I remember right, and the other character wants the top bunk, and John Candy is always giving these ridiculous explanations why it's his turn to have the top bunk again. Like, well, we're in Italy. If we were in Germany, it'd be your turn to have the top bunk, but we're in Italy, so it's my turn. And the other guy is just dumb enough that he accepts it. This paragraph reads like that. Am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's yet again, it's more stuff where I'm just like, okay, I'm really, really waiting for you to get back to the point about male victims. Like, insert skeleton.jpg, waiting for this guy to get to the point, right?
Yeah. So we'll skip the non sequitur, because I don't. It just that was like a bump, I guess. On one hand, this compulsory relationality, when expressed as emotional and social intelligence, is positive. And yeah, it can have a pro-social effect that comforts and conciliates. On the other, compulsory relationality can also increase the propensity for relational aggression, behavior that intends to harm others through deliberate manipulation of their social standing and relationships. 3 features of which include excluding someone, gossiping, or purposefully withdrawing. He could have just said purposely withdrawing acknowledgement of another's presence. For example, the silent treatment. He left one out. Gossiping can cover threat narratives, but I think threat narratives are pretty specific. But I don't know if psychology has caught up with that yet. Threat narratives are very specific. Allison has a whole series of videos on that on her Typhon Blue channel. So if you look up Typhon Blue and threat narratives on YouTube, you can view those. And we went over those in an episode too. But essentially, it's when you falsify a circumstance where you're innocent and vulnerable, and your target is powerful and has intent to do harm, and then you spread it around your social circle or around the environment you're trying to affect in order to achieve some sort of harm to your target. or gain some sort of power or position, etc. So that's and it can be gossip, but there are women who do it without gossiping. There are women who do it a threat narrative can even just be pretending to be afraid of somebody all the time without actually saying any reason why, or going to the clerk of courts and asking for a restraining order and making a false allegation of abuse in order to get it. So there you go, and that is abuse, by the way. A study on gendered bullying. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, that it's called administrative abuse, and it's actually a really, it's a form of abuse that's very much not. It's not talked about as much, but I see it a lot when I'm talking to people, and I have seen it with both men and women. So I mean, it's not like it's just one thing, but this is something that's commonly used against men. So for example, to make claims about the man being abusive or things like that in order to get custody of the children and kind of lock him out of his children's lives. And it's actually, I would say for many people, it's one of the more damaging forms of abuse, because it goes back to the whole sticks and stones may break my bones thing, but it's like this kind of abuse can have very, very far-reaching consequences for people.
Yeah, you can cause somebody to end up in jail. You can cause somebody to lose their relationships with people. You can cause somebody to lose their job. You can cause somebody to kill themselves. You can take away somebody's relationship with their children, which can cause them to kill themselves. So there's a whole lot of, and it's unfortunate that it doesn't get discussed more often outside of the men's rights movement. It's very rarely addressed, and the behavior is protected under the Violence Against Women Act. The court system is discouraged from prosecuting crimes like perjury, lying to police during an investigation, and filing false complaints, restraining order abuse, if they are done by somebody who is alleging, particularly a woman who is alleging intimate partner violence or sexual violence. Anybody else does it, they'll prosecute. If you were you're engaging in insurance fraud, they'll prosecute. If you are doing it as a means of protecting yourself from getting convicted of a crime you committed, they'll prosecute. But if you're female and you falsely accused a man of hitting or raping you, and you engaged in those process crimes, they ignore them. So that facilitates those. He goes on. A study on gendered bullying styles suggested that girls are much more likely to engage in relational aggression within same-sex groups compared to boys, who are more likely to be physically aggressive. Similarly, in the workplace, women colleagues are more likely than male colleagues to be passive-aggressive and socially aggressive with each other. Well, they're more likely than men. Men are more likely to cooperate with each other. They find reasons to cooperate with each other, even if they hate each other. Even if they really detest each other, they need to get shit done, they will work shoulder to shoulder. But women, I just went through that actually at work. A chick that got mad because I was good at my job. Not better than she was at her job, just that she wasn't better than I was at the job. That's it. And it set off a year of behaviors that were just toddlerish, honestly.
It's so embarrassing.
I know. I was like, we're really going to do this. But, yeah. Notably, relational aggression is not limited to just interactions between women. It can also show up in mixed-sex friendships and relationships between women and men. Further relational aggression can manifest generationally, spilling over into parenting, as discussed in Jeanette McCurdy's memoir. Of course, he has to cite a female victim. Why I'm glad my mother died. I'm sure that there have probably been books written by abused men who maybe they didn't title it that way. They weren't quite so blatant about it. But that talked about their abuse, relational aggression and otherwise, by their mothers, that he could have cited as examples of, an author who wrote about being abused by a mother as a child. But, I mean, I know women are more likely to talk about it, but in any case... Yeah, that book recently came out. That book name sounds familiar. Statement. That was from... Well, I just lost it. There we go. Saltpeter Taffy. Yes, A Child Called It, Ratmus. That's one right there. That one is horrible. The experience that the child went through. The book is just gut-wrenching. And I couldn't finish it. I couldn't. My kid was young, and all I could think of was... Like, it's one of those books that you read a little bit of it, and you want to just go hug your child and not let go.
Oh.
Like, I don't understand the behavior. And it is sickening. I don't know, maybe my response is weird, but that's... Like, I want to go comfort my kid who hasn't been wounded or injured by me because I read about some other mother who is a monster.
I think that's called just, being a normal, healthy parent.
Yeah.
I don't think that most of us like to hear these kinds of stories about other people being like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. We were at both relational aggression. Oh wait, no, I missed one. Significant overlap exists between feminine relational aggression and classical power. The classical power and control tactics of psychological abuse, particularly covert narcissistic abuse, or perhaps it's not just significant overlap. Perhaps female relational aggression is covert narcissistic abuse. Has nobody considered that? That perhaps there are high-functioning narcissists out there engaging in this kind of behavior? That's female relational aggression?
I think that, honestly, a lot of people probably just don't give much thought to it. I feel like most people are just... following the assumptions that most abusers are men, and that's the long and short of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But I just wonder, you raise somebody to think they're too important to get their hands dirty because of their sex. Does that not foster a bit of narcissism? Just thinking about it. Yet, both relational aggression and psychological abuse can be covered up with rationalizations that are legal and socially acceptable at face value. This unfortunate reality complicates getting accountability for either, which can lead to bitterness, and particularly for male survivors who are unlikely to be believed anyway, misogyny/misogynoir.
What the hell?
So, again... We're focusing on women, we're centering women in a discussion about male victims. We're centering women and analysis of women's behavior and analysis of men's failures toward women because they were victims. Like, that's
it really is like this really bizarre hesitancy to talk proper about the topic at hand.
Yeah.
And it's like, and yet they wonder why many men have difficulty talking about their experiences.
Yeah.
It's like we can't have an honest discussion about what their real experiences are. And yet, it's men's fault for not being able to talk about it correctly. Men haven't been socialized to talk about it correctly. It's like, even you can't talk about it correctly. Don't tell me that men have not been socialized to talk about it. Like, get out of my face with that.
Well, and I'm looking at this, and who socialized him to not talk about it correctly? Because it wasn't the patriarchy. He's paying homage to feminist narratives about female victimhood and male perpetration. That's not patriarchy. By any feminist definition. So really quick before we go on, I'm going to look. This says, so we're at implications for advocates. How much of this page is advertisement? Okay, so we don't really have that far to go. We're almost to the end of the article, and he has said very little about actual male victims. But and what he has said has been blame. So here we go. Patriarchy has no gender. Really? Why do you name it after men?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's kind of in the title there.
Bell hooks. We are quoting bell hooks. Yep. And that's helpful to male victims. The third reason we overlook the victimization of men by women is because we confuse protecting women from patriarchy with dismantling patriarchy. When in fact women can be patriarchal. Those damn fatherly women.
I mean, it really is just like this ubiquitous boogeyman that we can apply to everything now. That's just what this is.
Yes, women are infected with patriarchy.
Hey.
As black as black feminist scholar Bell Hooks wrote, patriarchy has no gender. Again, I'm like, why the hell did you name it after men if it has no gender? To Hook's point, did she have a habit of not capitalizing her name? Because he hasn't capitalized her name. I wonder if that was a thing. I did that for a while in junior high because I was lazy. And I tried to make up a reason why, it was cool, but really I just was lazy.
Yeah,
and my teacher...
That's really weird.
My teacher called me on it.
I looked at it at one point, and it's like, oh, it's probably a typo. But then I looked up, and it's like, no, he hasn't done that for 3 times now. Wait, what's going on here?
My English teacher called me on it. She's like, you just don't want to write capital letters, and you don't want to type capital letters, and that's it. I was like, yeah, you're right. And she was. I was just lazy. So, he says, to Hook's point, patriarchal domination is a social system and ideology that is conditioned and socialized into everyone, including girls and women, in the form of internalized patriarchy. It's actually really good with some butter and honey. Oh wait, no, that was cream of wheat. Again. Damn it. I keep mixing the two up.
Yeah.
Operationalizing patriarchy in terms of hegemonic values. Like, that is the shortest word salad I've ever read.
Yeah, it's like, it seems like you yourself are having trouble with, in finger quotes, operationalizing patriarchy, because it seems like a thing that you can just apply to it now. Like, okay, my bedroom mirror is patriarchy because I can, I don't know, look in it and I can see myself and it has a male gaze or something. My fan is patriarchy because it was made by a man. I don't know, I can come up with anything. We can just keep going if we want to. Patriarchy here, patriarchy there. It's the Oprah meme. Everybody is patriarchy.
As Big Red pointed out, patriarchy fuckface.
Yeah.
I still want a patriarchy fuckface cartoon. I think that there should be a cartoon character or a comic character named Patriarchy Fuckface, because I think that would be hilarious. But We don't have that. And I suck at drawing, so if somebody creates it, it won't be me. People won't be able to figure out what the hell that picture is supposed to depict. Operationalizing. I've never heard that as a word before. Feminists like to do that. They take words, instead of saying, what would operationalizing mean? So to make something operational, you cause it to function, right? You build it up or make it real, make it physical. Like the Death Star is fully operational after its construction has been completed, right? It's finished. They finished building it. It's fully operational. Or at least they finished building the functional moving parts, right? So operationalization would basically just be making something fully operational. Building it or manifesting it to the point where it functions. So making Patri functional in terms of its hegemonic values, assumptions, and aims, instead of simply attributing it to biological sex, can be an enlightening experience for male survivors of abuse by women who exhibit patterns of behavior that reflect patriarchal socialization. It doesn't make sense once you start to define the word in terms of the meaning of its parts.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem, because that's what operationalizing something is supposed to be. It's supposed to make it into something that you can define so that you can apply the word to other scenarios so that everybody knows what it is you're talking about. Right?
Yeah.
It's so that things can be replicated, so that you can understand what it is that everybody's discussing. And
I don't know. It just seems like a weirdly made up word that was created in order to avoid using a phrase that would be more clearly understood if it was used instead. But that's just my 2 cents on that. Yet gender essentialism gets in the way. Gender essentialism, the notion that women and men are monolithic demographics and that any observable distinctions are rooted in fundamental differences that are allegedly innate and intrinsic, biologizes gender in a way that makes it impossible to account for male victims and female perpetrators. No, that's another bullshit one. Here he is basically saying that recognizing that there are biological differences on average between male and female human beings, which is true, makes it impossible to recognize male victims, because we know, I think, that men are physically larger and stronger on average than women. But it doesn't, because we can recognize when someone uses a knife or a gun or a poison or a pot of boiling water, attacks someone while they're sleeping, drunk, in public and are not allowed to hit back, or otherwise, like, threatening to harm the children, threatening to boil the dog. The many different things that women can do to hurt a man. Well, you're not home all the time. You better watch out for your pets, Like, those kind of things, you can recognize that those are abusive behaviors regardless of the size of the man.
Mm-hmm.
I would think, unless, you're a sociopath.
Yeah.
Just my 2 cents, but I would think you would have to be a raving nut job to think that it has no effect whatsoever on a person to face that kind of abuse.
Well, I mean, yeah, you would think it would be obvious, but I mean, for some reason, there is a real blind spot. One might say a bias,
Yeah.
wink, wink, against male victims where their experiences are somehow minimized or treated as, lesser than women's experiences.
So I'm going to try to rush through the last couple of paragraphs really quick if you've got, 5 minutes. This is a rough one. When we operationalize patriarchy beyond gender essentialism, however, we can see beneath the surface of abuse and focus on the core characteristic of patriarchal control and dominance rather than the perpetrator's sex assigned at birth. So basically, when women abuse, it's not their fault, it's patriarchy. Am I reading that right?
More or less. It's never women's fault.
That's what I thought. In turn, male survivors of abuse by women can feel validated and witnessed, because that's what men think about, decreasing the likelihood that trauma radicalizes them into misogyny out of frustration that their pain seems invisible and incomprehensible to broader society. Thus, it is critical for victims' advocates to realize that when male survivors are able to contextualize their victimization and traumatization by women, particularly via historical, political, religious, scientific, and psychological contexts about patriarchal domination, they are arguably less likely to bond with other men over misogyny and less likely to be emboldened into, and this blew my mind, recidivism.
Do you know what that word means?
Yes! It is when a criminal, after they have been through the supposed rehabilitation process of incarceration and whatever therapies have been assigned to them, ends up incarcerated again because they went right back and committed another crime.
Yeah, it's like, it really, really is like this guy is just trolling and completely forgot what he was writing about. Because his focus just hasn't been on that at all.
He's blaming men for male abuse. Men as a population are being blamed for women engaging individually in abuse of individual men. So he says, in almost all cases, it's healthy for survivors to realize their perpetrators attempted to gain power and control over them because they lacked a sense of power and control in their own life. Moreover, in instances of legal abuse or malicious prosecution that hinge on false allegations, it's healthier for a male survivor to understand his abuser's motive for victim playing rather than resign himself to misogynistic distrust. I will say some things about that, but not yet. Practically speaking, too, deconstructing patriarchy toward these ends is ultimately the most productive. Most of all, it's important for victims' advocates to consider how psychoeducation about patriarchy can prepare male survivors for the possibility that accountability and justice may never come. It is an inevitable fact of life that people get away with mistreating others, often avoid guilt by villainizing their victims. Fortunately, the truth not coming to light does not have to feel like the end of the world for male survivors any more than it has to be confirmation of misogynistic stereotypes.
Right. Yeah, and so, we should probably just say the same thing about women victims, right? That that they'll just get away with it and that's okay. Or do we have a problem with it when we say it about women? Maybe we should stop minimizing their experiences just because they're men and treat it with the same amount of consideration and seriousness that we treat women victims.
Yeah.
But, maybe that's just me being idealistic because this guy did just write an entire essay that only talked briefly about male victims in the footnote, so what do I know?
It's really amazing. He got through that whole article, and pretty much the overwhelming majority of the article centered women, right? To use their language, centered women and concern for women. And, in an article that was supposed to be about victims of female perpetrators of abuse, and in particular male victims of female perpetrators of abuse. But it was more important to say, what about the women? And I look at this, that one line about recidivism. Recidivism into what?
Yeah, exactly. It's like they haven't offended in the first place in many cases. So I don't know.
Right? And
screw this guy.
And like, considering what he said in this second to the last paragraph about psychoeducation, about patriarchy, preparing male survivors for the possibility that accountability and justice may never come, that has nothing to do with patriarchy. That's gynocentrism, right? Accountability and justice don't come for victims of female perpetrators because our society prioritizes women's interests over those of men. That's not patriarchal.
No.
So, and I don't know. In any case, there was something else I was gonna point out. About the malicious prosecution. It's healthier for a male survivor to understand his abuser's motive for victim playing rather than resign himself to misogynistic distrust. Really, really, that's a false allegation right there. When you look at male victims of malicious prosecution by female accusers trying to manipulate the family court system or their family or gain attention or whatever, right? They don't develop a brand new distrust of women. They develop a distrust of the system to protect them if a woman happens to be another sociopath willing to do that to them. And they learn that they haven't been able to judge the character of the women that they have associated themselves with because they were vulnerable to that one false accuser. And so they lose trust in their ability to vet women for character to avoid this situation in the future. And I have seen victims of false allegations blame themselves over and over again for being falsely accused because of that last bit. So for this guy to turn around and call them misogynists is such bullshit. But that's it. That's like my conclusion on this is that he wanted to write an article about men or women and get men's advocates to read it. and think that it was, helpful and so on. And maybe didn't understand that we see through all the bullshit and aren't going to fall for the idea that we should blame men for women's abuse of men.
Alas.
Yeah.
I am gonna have to
with that,
here, but
thank you for being on to talk about this, because it's quite a hell of an article.
Oh gosh, this article is a motherfucker, but it's always nice to get to come on and vent with you guys and try not to be so much of a stranger.
Yeah, I know. Well, and being a parent of young kids makes you really busy, so I understand that too. Thanks very much for coming on. And thanks for staying over a few minutes.
No worries.
Right.
And hope to see you guys again soon.
I hope to see you soon too. And I don't know if Lauren and Mike, I don't know if you guys are awake, but thanks for coming on.
We're still here
as well. Oh, good.
I think Lauren's asleep.
Yeah.
I'm still here, wishing I was asleep. Not that I don't love you guys. Not that I don't love.
Well, this article might make a guy feel that way, though. Like,
this article has already put Lauren to sleep, and she tried. She tried her best to engage with this bullshit, but she's out for the count now. Yeah. And I'm not long behind.
Yeah, I mean, the psychobabble is mind-numbing. That alone, it makes it difficult. I had, when I read the article, I tried to read it after work. That was a mistake, because I work at night, and I get up in the morning, or get up in the morning. I get home in the morning, and I come in the door, and I take melatonin, and then I listen to things that make me sleepy, and then I go to sleep. But instead, I read this article, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up with a crick in my neck from my desk chair because I fell asleep. So I had to read it at work. Because the psychobabble just does it. You have to, like, alright, so they have invented a word to replace this phrase and that phrase. What do they mean? I have to look this word up. For Pete's sake, that's not what it sounds like it means, and that kind of shit. And in the end, I think the psychobabble is supposed to make it so hard for you to get through the article that you don't have the energy left to get mad about the fact that ultimately what he said is that it's men's fault that women abuse men. So, in any case...
be aware of what you're falling asleep to, folks.
Yeah.
If you're going to pick something, it ought to be rain noise. Or, just white noise. Sorry, not white. Brown noise. Pink noise.
Don't fall asleep to brown noise unless you want to wake up with a problem. That you know what the brown noise is, right?
Note.
The brown
note
is
a myth. It doesn't.
I know.
There is no note that will make you shit yourself. But there is such a thing as brown noise, and it's slightly less comforting than white noise. Ask a sound engineer. Shit, I guess I'm a sound engineer. Don't ask me. I don't know shit.
Genuinely though, I fall asleep to creepypasta and don't have nightmares from that. So
Mr. Bond's good to fall asleep to, isn't he? And he's basically a creepypasta channel.
Yep. Oh, there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them on and Reddit readers, right? Like different like the Reddit aliens subreddit where they ask questions and people answer and stuff, and you get a bunch of little individual stories and you learn about things that people have experienced, stuff like that. But it's the tone of voice and the way the rhythm of the read and everything. Although probably the most soothing out of all of those is, in my opinion, there's a guy that goes by Creeps McPasta, which is he sounds like he's gonna be this upbeat kind of guy. But he actually reads like a dad reading to his kids. And, or an older brother reading to little sister or little brother, and it's a very bedtime story-ish sound to the story reading.
That's not a thing yet on YouTube.
It is.
Men reading bedtime stories to their kids. It is it? I guess it would be.
Yeah.
But I assume it's going to be called misogynist and patriarchal at some point.
Oh yeah, everything that you do in life normally people have videotaped it and put it on YouTube. But yeah, I prefer stuff like that to static, and if I'm someplace like where I'm staying at a hotel or something, then I play box fan noise. There's actually a video on YouTube of 10 hours of a box fan. The noise of a box fan with a black screen so it doesn't light up the room, and you just plug your phone in and you play that, and it's longer than you're gonna sleep, and fine. But
you got to be jealous of people who can actually sleep in silence. Like, how does that work? Like in sober silence, you can just lie there sober in total silence and just fall asleep.
If I'm really exhausted, I can do that.
That must be amazing.
See, I grew up falling asleep to the sound of an air conditioner because of my asthma, and the few times I wasn't falling asleep to the sound of an air conditioner, I was falling asleep to the sound of one of those major fire hazard heaters that had a metal ribbon inside the heater that would turn bright red, and the thing would go all night. Like,
but you get used to it.
You get used to it.
Still get used to it somehow.
Yeah. But honestly, if I hadn't had those sounds, I would have grown up falling asleep to the sounds of frogs. The trilling of frogs, because they were everywhere where I grew up. So silence wasn't going to be a thing no matter what. And to this day, like, every time I've gone camping, I've fallen asleep to that, right? To this day, that sound makes me sleepy. Being out, you know, at night, and you hear frogs, and people think they're hearing crickets. But
I've noticed that because I've been in Connecticut for the last 2 months, and when I go outside for a smoke, I keep hearing this constant noise of.
Yeah, that's frogs. Frogs and toads.
It's frogs.
Yes.
There's not even that much standing water around here, but yeah, apparently there's frogs everywhere.
Well, they'll live in your garden. They don't have to have a body of water. They're amphibious. They can live in the water, but they can also live on land. So they live wherever they can find bugs to eat, and there's enough moisture that their skin doesn't dry out. You know, so they like Ohio because Ohio is really humid. But yeah, but I felt this article knocked me out when I first read it. It's the psychobabble. It feels like it's intended to be desensitizing. Because it's a lot easier if you desensitize somebody to pull some shit without them noticing that you are pulling some shit, right? But with that, I probably ought to end it because I'm going to get us into the after show. So, the patron-only after show. I'm going to show the title of the article that we're going over in the patron-only after show this time. Y'all, this is not a new article. I was in a discussion on Twitter, and somebody referenced a parody book about training women to serve and please men. And it was an obvious parody, and there's a male version, How to Train Your Man, too, which is also a parody. Both of those books are jokes. They're not intended for people to take them seriously, right? But this was intended to be taken seriously. Cosmopolitan magazine, which doesn't deserve to be taken seriously, and this is from 2009. There was a similar article that I read, and I found this one when I was looking for that article. I want to say early 90s, like maybe 93 or 94, also in Cosmopolitan magazine. It was almost identical to this. 6 ways to train your boyfriend. And then they say, we don't believe men are dogs, but some behavior molding techniques used on canines and other beasts can work on a guy. You may never have to nag again. So that's going to be what we're going to go over in the after show. That article is
I'll be present for this one. Folks.
Yeah, it's a real article intended to be taken seriously and used. So there you go. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks to everybody who worked in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And again, thanks to my co-hosts for sticking out this long sausage with me. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.